So now that we have Fate Stay Night finally coming out to the West, I figured that we should go over the visual novel releases up until this point in time, some of the key differences between them, things that may have changed, and what to expect from the new one that's coming up. Going all the way back to the original version, we got the first Fate Stay Night that came out on PC back on January 30th of 2004. This was the release that came out at Comiket. It's recognized as the limited edition. This is the release that marked the dawn of Type Moon going commercial instead of being this small indie company, and it went on to sell at least 400,000 copies. As you guys already know, it was marketed as an eroge, which means it's an adult game, and it was so well received that it ended up being not only the highest selling visual novel of that year, but one of the most prominent visual novels in history. Here we have the original that you can find from that. Pretty sleek design, especially from the time that it comes from. We have Saber in the front and center as always in her iconic position. To the left we got Sakura, to the right of her we got Rin, and that pretty much recognizes the three heroines of the series. We got Emiya in the background of all three of them, drawing back his bow. To the bottom left we got Hurt, to the bottom right we got Ilya, and then we have Cuchulainn over here to the side. This is continued over on the back side. You have Saber looking out into the open, Archer when he's first summoned, Ilya and Hurt when you first meet up with them, the initial bout that Saber had with Cuchulainn, the time where we run into Medusa, you have the graveyard fight between Heracles and Saber, Cuchulainn when he first ran into Rin and started to pull out his gay bull, and then you have Sakura and Shiro, and you can see this is where he comforts her over at the park. If you look over to the side, it does mention the fact that it includes some side material with the release, so it's not just the game that you're getting, so that's always a good thing. And if you look down to the bottom, it may be hard to see, but it actually shows the original price of the game when it first came out, which would be 8,800 yen. Translation for the US or the West, you're looking at around $60, which may not sound like a lot today, but it's kind of wild to think about back then, right? We're talking about $60 in 2004. And for all intents and purposes, Fate Stay Night is a book. It's just an interactive book. So even back then in 2004, you were paying $60 for a book. So anybody that decided to go out and make that purchase, especially not knowing anything about Fate beforehand, just banking on it being good, you were really making a true investment. The only other thing giving some weight to that is if you may have already been a fan of Type Moon prior to this. So maybe you read Kara no Kyokai, maybe you read Tsukihime, and you had a lot of belief in them in the first place. But that's not a lot of people because again, they weren't commercial yet. This is what made them big. This is what blew them up. So when you consider that 400,000 copies sold, this is most people's first time. So shout out to those people that decided to give Fate a chance, because realistically, that's the reason that a lot of us know about it now. When you first open it up, you'll notice that it comes with an art book right off the bat and the Fate side material, cardboard cover on top of it. And then when you pull the sleeve off, you'll see that the actual design is inside of the scabbard, inside of a sheath. And believe it or not, just coming off the bat, this was 100 pages, which is a lot even back then. I'm just looking at this now. A lot of people would charge $100 for this because of it being that initial release in modern days time. And it would literally provide the same amount of content. It would just cost more. And then in some of the pages, you open it up, you'll see some of this artwork. Again, you have Saber holding her sword, Ren to the back of her, and even Neko Arc at Ren's side. Now, if you don't know Neko Arc, she's a character that had already been established prior to this coming out. So this is more so a fan service to the people that are already aware of Tsukihime. She is the alternate form of one of their heroines, that being Arcaway. And then you have Saber off to the right. Then in some more pages, you get into some design work. This one is for Saber in particular. A lot of sketches in the way that she was drawn, in the way that she fights, and just a lot of recognizing her general demeanor. Once you get past that, you'll get the game case itself, which will be the CDs for the PC. And this has some completely different art counterpart to what you've seen on the front. Again, you have the three main heroines to let you know that's what this will be about. Once again, Saber in the front, Sakura to the side, Rin in the back. And you can see this from FGO because if you look up the FGO app, Saber is the one on the front cover. Saber has always been the character, the literal face, the mascot of the series. It's always either her or Emiya, but usually it's her. And you can tell this by how many times she's in the front of all the other characters. And that still holds true even today with things like Grand Order. When you continue over to the backside, you'll see even more depictions. First up, we got the summoning circle up top and the original Fate Stay Night emblem covering it. If you look at the emblem itself, it actually looks a lot like command spells, but this isn't the command spells of any of the original cast. In fact, if you go out and try to find ones that's similar, it actually favors the command spell of Hakuno, who ended up being the main character of Fate Extra. That's the one that the original Stay Night emblem looks like the most. You go down to the bottom, first picture you see is when Shiro and Saber end up meeting with Rin and Archer, and she has her sword held over Rin. The second, you have when Kirei attacked Rin and stole Ilya in the Fate route. In the third, you have the fight with Medusa. In the next one, you have Saber looking out into the distance again, but this time it comes from the actual opening. You have the heart-to-heart between Shiro and Rin back in UB-Dub. And there's Saber going against Medea, and she's completely warding off her spells thanks to her magical resistance. You got Sakura being present in the kitchen, and then you have the meetup with Ilya, which once again, as you can tell, is another scene from one of the openings. When you open up the actual case, you get the manual, and you actually get 3 discs that work in accordance to each one of the routes. So for the people that don't know, if you've happened to read the novel by this point in time, you were actually done a service, because all 3 of the routes were completely separate when the game first came out, and you can tell just by the way that the discs are marked. The first disc is Saber's route, the second disc is Rin's route, and then the third disc is of course Sakura's. You weren't able to read each one of them side by side like you're able to today. That was something that came later on. That's the general gist of the OG, the very first version of Fate Stay Night. A couple of months later, after their initial showcase, March 26, 2004. This is the standard edition. This time around, you can see that it has a completely different cover featuring all white, still keeping the same 3 heroines at the front, and it honestly looks a lot more like the CD case that came with the original. Kind of just tells you the meat and potatoes of what you're getting into right off the bat. And then on the back side to this one, you'll see that we have completely different designs at the top, and then on the bottom half, you have some of the old mixed in with some new ones. Still counts as the original OG version of Stay Night. It just wasn't the limited edition. It wasn't the first release. We jump over 3 years later, April 19, 2007. By this time, the PlayStation 2 has come out. One of the biggest releases in gaming history, period. So if you think that we were making a huge noise about it, you can imagine Japan's actual origin literally exploded. So at this point is when Fate Stay Night received its first port. A port essentially being when a game is ported over to another platform or another console, where it made its first move from PC over to the PlayStation. This would come to be known as the first version of Rialto Nua. So what's the difference between Rialto Nua and the original? Well, in accordance to the laws that are set forth in Japan when it comes to putting out games on consoles, it's different from what they had going on over on the PC. Remember, Fate had that adult content, and the PlayStation is being marketed to the public. So in order for them to get the game off, they had to either take those things out altogether or heavily shift them around. So that's what ended up happening. Those sex scenes that were primarily in the OG version ended up being taken out to make it more palatable for the market, which was perfect for Nasu because, as I mentioned several times before, he never wanted to put majority of those scenes in anyway unwarranted. The reason that Fate Stay Night started off as an eroge, as a quote-unquote sex game in the first place, is to increase the eyes on the game itself, because remember, they were an indie company. That was their first commercial release. He wanted the game to do well. It was a marketing ploy, and a very good one at that, because as you can see, it obviously worked. And you can see this with some of the later variations of Fate, how he kind of fell back from that eroge genre, because that's not really what Fate was about in the first place. But here's the thing at this point, Nasu's thinking, okay, well, since we gotta change the game around anyway, we might as well go all out. Let's take all the success that we had thus far and put it back into the craft. Again, very smart move. So instead of just shifting those things around, Rialto Nua acts as a light remaster of the original game. They never come out and say that, but that's essentially what it is. By the way, Rialto Nua itself is Irish for new star. So by this point in time, the original anime of Fate Stay Night has already been released. It came out the year before in 2006. Rialto Nua was also supposed to come out in late 2006, but it ended up getting slowed down due to production. So that's why it ended up coming out in 2007. 2007 rolls around, they reinvested, they added music, they added additional art that wasn't present in the original game. Now that they did the anime and they had a cast of voice actors that you could put to these faces in the actual series, they went and got the voice actors that you know now, and they went back and did the lines for the entire novel. And as another hint of fan service, a surprise for all of the people that went through the first version, they added the additional ending last episode where Saber meets up with Shiro in Avalon. As far as Rialto Nua goes, in terms of success, Rialto Nua still ended up going on to sell 184,000 copies, which is really good considering that the game was already out to begin with. And since this is coming off the back of the anime, I'm sure that encouraged a lot of those people to finally go check it out when they did decide to pop up with this on the consoles. The copies that were sold was documented by Kadokawa Shoten, which is a Japanese publishing company who also covers anime, games, so on and so forth. Another accolade they received that same year came from the Dengeki G magazine, where they said that Fate Stay Night was the second most interesting of all Bushido games. Bushido essentially being a game that involves heavy interactions with a lot of females, and as you know, that was a big selling point for Fate, only falling behind to the likes of Clanad, which is a series that primarily focuses on that genre. If you look at the cover for the PlayStation 2 version, we still have Saber front and center in that same position, but this time around she's looking directly into the camera and she's exactly in the middle. To her right you see Rin, and to the left you see Sakura, and then behind them all you have Shiro instead of Archer. So Shiro kind of replaces that aspect that Archer was giving beforehand, which is some good symbology for the people that know, because Archer ends up being his future variant. And then in the back behind Shiro you have multiple servants that appear throughout the war that blend into the background in a different color. On the back side you have some of those same images from the novel as before, but this time around they've added the entire lineup of heroines all just standing right alongside one another. They also added this shattered glass effect, which is really nice to capitalize on even more scenes but in a different way. And if you notice, you can see that Kadokawa Shoten has their publishing down towards the bottom, which is very important to keep in mind for what this leads up into. So around this time it gets a lot more complicated than it was before. There were multiple re-releases of the Rialto Nua version. I'll just be covering the main ones, and this starts off with the version that came out December 23rd in 2011. This is when they bring Rialto Nua back to the PC. You know, they said, hey, the game did really well, our original fans are on the PC, it's only right that we bring the Rialto Nua version back to the PC for the people that we started off with. So that's what they did. The thing is, now that Type Moon has involved themselves with Kadokawa, the marketing suggested that this time around they split the games into multiple portions. That's where the complicated part comes in. So instead of getting all 3 discs like you did in the original version, in order to get this new Rialto Nua version, which of course people are gonna want because it's basically a remaster, each one of the routes came on a different date and they all came separately. So when it came out in 2011, the only one that was released was the Fate route. A month later they came out with UB-Dub, and then a month after that, they came out with Heaven's Feel. Crazy, right? Marketing, of course. And get this, it wasn't even a physical copy. All three of these releases were only digital. So not only did you have to get them apart, but you couldn't even get it in your hands, which is insane. It was around this time where the community, the online community, started to invest more into making the novel more accessible in a more reasonable way. That way, if somebody's coming into it, they don't have to do all this running. Everything up until that point would be there, so the experience will be better for them. And if you look at all the horror stories of the versions that have come out, the community tried to make versions for everybody, and that's not necessarily the way that it was supposed to be. And so there would be a lot of errors in the system. People couldn't download it, it would crash, it wouldn't save, just because they were trying to keep the series flourishing. Before they finally got everything together with the most recent Ultimate Edition, it was still a real headache to get a hold of unless you actually went out and bought it. In that same year, November 26, 2012, this is when it came out on the handheld PlayStation, the PS Vita, or the second version to the PSP. Exact same game as it was before, it just got ported to being handheld. It tells us a port of Fate Stay Night Rialta Nua is being published for PlayStation Vita. The Vita version won't feature any new content, but it will have a new opening animation done by the studio Ufotable. And I'll have some of that playing here. The opening looks really good. As with a lot of their other openings, we're gonna do a completely separate video on those and go through some of them. But by this point in time, they had already worked with Ufotable because remember Kara no Kyokai. So they're thinking, oh, we gotta get with these guys again. They did a really exceptional job. Looking at the cover of the Rialta Nua version for the PS Vita, you have Saber in the front. From left to right, you have Medusa, Sakura, Emiya, Rin, and Shiro. So we got the whole team here again. Emiya drawing back his bow once again, just like he did in the original, but everything is a lot more renewed. And it looks a lot fresher too. The colors are more vivid, it's brighter, it's a lot less dull. The Rialta Nua covers truly feel like a renewed edition. By this point in time, everything is still in Japanese. Fate Stay Night has yet to touch the West, officially translated in English. Any translation that you came across was strictly done by the community, which is also wild when you consider that Unlimited Codes, which predates this, it came out in 2009, it had an English translation and it was available to the West. But at that point in time, it was something about the visual novel being put out internationally that rubbed them the wrong way. They didn't believe that the results would be just, so they never bothered to push the issue. And with so many people not knowing about it to begin with, there was little backing to convince them otherwise until the emergence of titles like FGO, Extella, Mihoyo, and the Tsukihime remake, where they finally started to realize, oh, these guys really do want this stuff. Clearly. And then on the back of the PS Vita version, it is a lot more modern than anything that we've seen up until this point. Still addressing the heroines, but now you have the camera rolls to the side of different events that occurred in the novel in the same way that you had the shattered glass effect. This too looked really good for its time. On January 30th, 2014, they released the Fate Stay Night version that came bundled with Hollow Ataraxia, which is its sequel. This also was on PC. The thing is, this exclusive was only available for a month to celebrate the 10th anniversary, so if you didn't get your copy, you were just stuck. It came with Ataraxia, it came with the 10th anniversary art book, and even more side material. And then they finally put this back out again later on down the line. And then you have the version of Rialta Nua that's directly in the mobile store, but it's only in Japanese. So still, unless you know Japanese, if you're somebody that's international, it doesn't do you any good. And this version has been out for years. It's been out since 2015. And that brings us to today, the newest version that just got announced to be released in 2024 while they were doing the celebration for their 20th anniversary. And if you notice, the cover is exactly the same as the cover from the old Rialto Nua version over a decade ago. And this is supposed to be the official remaster. This is supposed to be them coming out and saying we're polishing up everything from the ground up and we're finally officially releasing it to the West. This is the very first international release, and it would only be available in English and Chinese outside the original language. It would make its way to Nintendo Switch and Steam, which had grown in popularity by this time. But even when they showed us the trailer for this edition, nothing came off as them doing any actual remastering. It just looked like the exact same game ported over once again with an official translation. All the images look the same, all the backgrounds look the same. That isn't to say that they can't change it later on, but if they are introducing things that are actually remastered, you would think that they would lead forward with that instead of just using what they had from years before and calling it remastered because it's translated. By 2024, with the release of things like MiHoYo and the Tsukihime remake, the quality of Type Moon's visual novels have skyrocketed to the point where a lot of portions of them are animated. If anybody isn't familiar with what a remaster is, there's different ways that you can go about it. Some people may just change the art, some people may just change the music. As I mentioned before, Rialto Nua was kind of a light remaster, so they didn't really do enough to say, oh, it's just an outright remaster. That's why they never called it that. But in a proper remaster, majority of the elements should stay the same, and most importantly, things are being reworked from the ground up. And using a remaster of Halo, for example, this is the first version of Halo, this is the remastered version of Halo. As you can tell, the remastered version looks completely modernized and it looks way better. That's what a remaster is supposed to be. So when they remaster the novel, this remastered version shouldn't have Takeuchi's old design, which is Natsu's main artist, his right hand. It should have all of the old stuff in Takeuchi's new style. That means the sprites, the backgrounds, so on and so forth. And then of course there's the Ultimate Edition, again something that was completely made by the community several years back, that merges all three of the routes so you can play them together. Keeps the music, keeps the acting, and even the eroge scenes that were taken out from before. That way you can toggle on and off whether you want that to be in the game, so you can get that original feel, that original experience. So that's all of the main versions up until this point in time. I just wanted to clear that up just in case anybody was confused about all these different types, all these different covers that you may have seen online, not knowing which is which, what they were made for, and how come Fate is getting remastered in 2024 when it's already been out all of this time. It's never been officially translated is the thing, and that's the reason why the community is so excited, because they've been pushing this for a very long time, nearly 2 decades to be exact. So to see that finally coming to fruition is a huge win for not just the people coming in, but the people that have been around all this time to finally see that come alive. As far as a remake goes, because I see a lot of people confuse what a remake and a remaster is. A remaster, again, is just enhancing the older content. They might add additional elements, but you're not truly rewriting the story itself. A remake would be completely rewriting the story itself. So it might include content that was cut out from years ago, like the additional routes. It might end up being a completely different Stay Night altogether, which a lot of people, they don't want to take away from that original feel. For most people, Fate Stay Night is considered a masterpiece anyway without touching it regardless. But if they decided to do that, those are the things that you would expect. Brand new music, brand new interactions, different backgrounds that we haven't seen before, the whole nine. It wouldn't just be them polishing, it would truly be Fate Stay Night starting anew, like the Tsukihime remake.